At our New Year's Eve dinner, my son raised his glass and said, "I hope this is Dad's last New Year in this house." Everyone laughed. I smiled back. I caught the hidden threat in his words. But I stayed calm. What they didn't know was that I'd already made one phone call, and the next morning when police cars pulled into my driveway, his entire world collapsed. Hello everyone, thanks for joining us. Please like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which country or city are you tuning in from. A gentle note, this tale blends dramatized scenarios with educational insights. If names or settings seem familiar, it's entirely by chance, though the lessons here are profoundly important. The phone rang on a cold November morning, the kind of cold that settles deep into your bones when you live alone in a house built from stone. I was standing by the kitchen window, watching frost creep across the apple trees, when the sound cut through the silence. For a moment, I thought about letting it go to voicemail, but something made me cross the room and pick up the receiver. "Dad!" I froze. It was Brandon's voice, my son, who hadn't called in 4 months. Not since that bitter argument back in July when he'd stood in this very kitchen and told me I was being stubborn, that I was wasting my life holding on to land I was too old to manage. "Brandon," I said carefully, "this is a surprise." There was a pause, and then his voice came through again, softer this time, almost warm. "Dad, I'm sorry. I've been thinking a lot about what I said, and I was wrong. I shouldn't have pushed you like that." I didn't say anything, just waited. In 64 years, I'd learned that silence often tells you more than words ever could. "I was wondering," Brandon continued, "if maybe we could come see you for New Year's. All of us, Vanessa, Ethan, Lily. The kids miss their grandpa. I miss you, Dad. I want us to have a fresh start. A fresh start." The words hung in the air like morning fog over the Columbia River. Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that my son had come to his senses, that family still meant something. But another part of me, the part that had spent 8 years learning to trust my own instincts, held back. "That would be nice," I heard myself say. "Really nice." "Yeah, that's great, Dad. We'll plan on it then. I'll call you next week with details." After we hung up, I stood there with the phone still in my hand, staring out at the orchard that stretched across 220 acres of Wenatchee Valley. Beyond the bare branches, I could just make out the Cascade Mountains rising against the pale November sky. To understand why that call shook me the way it did, you need to know who I am. Not just my name, Thomas Hargrove, though most folks call me Tom, but the life I've built here over the last 40 years. I bought this land in 1985, the same year Brandon was born. My wife Caroline was pregnant then, glowing with determination. We were young and broke, and probably a little crazy, sinking everything we had into 220 acres of rocky Washington soil and a stone farmhouse that dated back to the 1920s. The place needed everything: new roof, new plumbing, a barn that didn't lean like a drunk on Saturday night. But Caroline saw what it could be. She always did. We planted the first apple trees that spring, working side by side until our backs ached and our hands bled. Honeycrisp, Gala, Granny Smith. We built this orchard row by row, season by season, while Brandon grew from a baby into a boy who loved to run between the trees, his laughter echoing across the valley. Then came Grace 3 years later. Our daughter, who looked so much like her mother, it sometimes made my chest tight just to see her smile. She inherited Caroline's practical mind, her gift for numbers and planning. Grace managed the bookkeeping while I handled the physical work, the pruning, the spraying, the harvest. For 33 years, Caroline and I worked this land together. We built a reputation for quality fruit that spoke for itself. This wasn't just a farm. It was our life, our legacy, our proof that two people with nothing but determination and each other could build something that mattered. Then in 2016, Caroline got sick. She fought it for 2 years, fought like hell, actually, with that same fierce determination she'd brought to everything. but some battles you can't win. That November 8 years ago now, I lost her. She was only 53. I was 56. I thought about selling after that. Thought about it every morning when I woke up to an empty bed. But every time I walked the orchard rows, I could feel Caroline there in the trees we'd planted in the soil we'd tended in the stone walls of the house we'd rebuilt together. So I stayed. Grace understood. She visits twice a month, calls every Sunday without fail, helps out during harvest season. She's never once suggested I should sell, never made me feel like I was clinging to the past. She knows this place is more than just land and trees. It's memory made solid. It's love that outlasted loss. Brandon, though. Brandon's visits became different after his mother passed. Less frequent, and when he did come, there was always an edge to it. Questions about estate planning, about what the land was worth, about whether I'd considered options. He'd started a contracting business in Spokane, and from what little he shared, it wasn't going well. His wife Vanessa worked in commercial real estate, always impeccably dressed, always checking her phone. The grandkids, though, Ethan's 9 now and Lily's 6, they still had that wonder in their eyes when they visited. Still wanted to climb the apple trees and chase the barn cats and hear stories about their grandmother. That's what I held on to, which is why that phone call rattled me so much. 4 months of silence broken by an apology and an invitation. A fresh start, he'd said. Part of me wanted desperately to believe it. Part of me remembered every piece of advice Caroline had given me over the years, distilled down to one essential truth she'd said more than once. Trust your children, Tom. But trust yourself first. I set the phone back on the counter and returned to the window. The frost had spread further now, delicate patterns across the glass that would melt by noon. Beyond it, my orchard waited 220 acres of bare branches that would bloom again come spring the way they always had. In my hand, my phone buzzed with a text from Brandon, really looking forward to it. Dad, love you. I stared at those last 2 words for a long time. Then I thought about Caroline's warning and wondered if maybe, just maybe, I should have trusted myself a little more than I wanted to trust my son. I needed air. After hanging up with Brandon, I stood in that kitchen for what felt like an hour, but was probably only a few minutes. The walls felt too close, the silence too loud. So I pulled on my work jacket, the canvas one with Caroline's sewing job on the left elbow, patched so many times the patch had patches, and stepped outside. The cold hit me like a wall. November in Wenatchee Valley doesn't mess around. The frost had spread across everything overnight, turning the grass silver and making each breath come out in white clouds. My boots crunched on the frozen ground as I walked toward the orchard, and that sound brought me back to myself somehow. 220 acres stretched out before me in neat, precise rows. Even bare of leaves, the trees had a certain dignity to them. The honeycrisps closest to the house, their branches reaching up like arms in prayer. Beyond them, the galas, my reliable workhorses. And furthest out, where the land sloped gently toward the east, the Granny Smiths stood like sentries, their trunks thick and gnarled from decades of Washington weather. I walked the first row, slowly letting my hand trail along the rough bark. To the west, the Cascade Mountains rose up sharp and white against the pale morning sky. To the east, through the bare branches, you could catch glimpses of the Columbia River, winding its way through the valley like a silver ribbon. Eastern Washington isn't like the west side. Out here we get maybe 10 inches of precipitation annually. The air is dry, the summer's hot, and the winter's cold in a way that settles into your bones. But that dryness is what makes our apples perfect concentrated sweetness, crisp texture, the kind of fruit that makes people stop chewing and really taste what they're eating. I stopped in the middle of the Honeycrisp section and closed my eyes. If I concentrated, I could almost see it the way it was that first spring in 1985. We were 25 and 22, Caroline and me, and we had no business buying a farm. When we saw the listing 220 acres stone farmhouse needs work, she'd looked at me with those clear gray eyes and said, "This is it, Tom. This is where we start." Needs work turned out to be the understatement of the century. The house had good bones, built in 1924, but nearly everything else was shot. Roof leaked in 6 places. Plumbing was a disaster. The barn listed so far to the left, you could practically use it as a sundial. But Caroline saw potential where I saw problems. She was 7 months pregnant, and there she was, paintbrush in hand, refusing to let me do all the work alone. We scraped and painted every room, ripped out old pipes and installed new ones, patched the roof with tar and prayers, rebuilt the barn from the ground up, and when spring finally came, we planted our first trees. I remember that day so clearly. My hands were torn up from digging in rocky soil blisters on top of blisters. Caroline's back ached, she was due any day, but she was right there beside me, lowering each sapling into its hole with the kind of care most people reserve for newborns. "Mute, these trees are Brandon's future," she'd said, patting soil around a gala sapling. "When he's our age, he'll walk these rows and remember we planted them together." Over the years, we became partners in the truest sense. I handled the physical work, the pruning, the pest control, the irrigation, the harvest. Caroline managed everything else. She kept the books with precision, tracked every expense and sale. She negotiated with buyers, organized farmers' markets, baked apple pies and apple butter to sell alongside the fresh fruit. She was my strength when I wanted to quit. There were bad years, late frosts, early heat waves, hailstorms that stripped the trees bare. But Caroline would sit at that kitchen table running the numbers, and she'd look up at me with absolute certainty and say, "We'll make it work, Tom. We always do." Then came 2014. She started feeling tired, bone-tired, the kind that doesn't go away with sleep. The diagnosis came in January 2015, advanced stage poor prognosis, treatment options limited. Caroline fought for 2 years. She never complained, not once, just kept managing the books from her hospital bed, kept asking about the harvest, kept telling me to make sure I pruned the galas correctly come spring. November 2016 brought the first snow early. I remember standing at the bedroom window watching fat flakes drift down onto the orchard. Caroline was in bed thinner than I'd ever seen her, but she smiled when she saw the snow. "The trees will rest now," she whispered. "That's good." She slipped away that night with the snow still falling and the orchard settling into its winter sleep. For a while I thought about selling, but every time I walked these rows I felt Caroline here. In the trees we'd planted together, in the stone walls we'd rebuilt, in the soil we'd worked, until it became something that could sustain life. Over the years, developers started circling. I've had offers, good ones. Last year, someone went as high as $4.2 million cash, closed in 30 days. I turned them all down. This isn't just land. This is Caroline. This is Brandon's first steps between the apple trees and Grace learning to drive on the dirt roads between sections. This is 33 years of marriage, of building something that matters. When I finally walked back to the house, I stopped in the living room. There on the mantel above the fireplace sits a photograph in a simple wooden frame. Caroline, young and glowing, holding infant Brandon in her arms. She's looking down at him with such fierce love that it makes my chest ache even now. Behind her, through the window, you can just see the young orchard, our first trees, barely more than saplings. I stood there for a long time studying that photograph, and I wondered, does he remember? Does my son remember how much his mother loved this place? Does he understand that when she looked at these trees, she was seeing his future? Or has he forgotten the way we all forget the things that matter most until it's too late? The phone rang at 9 o'clock Sunday morning, right on schedule. I was at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, and the Wenatchee world spread out in front of me, though I'd been staring at the same article for 10 minutes without actually reading it. My mind kept drifting back to Brandon's call, turning it over and over like a stone in my pocket. But when I picked up and heard Grace's voice, warm and familiar as an old sweater, something in my chest loosened. "Morning, Dad. How are you holding up?" That was Grace. Always checking in, always genuinely wanting to know. Not "how are you" as a formality, but as a real question that deserved a real answer. "Oh, you know, I said, pushing the newspaper aside. Same as always. How's the semester going? Busy. I've got a seminar on medieval monasticism that's kicking my tail 18 undergrads who think monks just sat around copying manuscripts and drinking beer. She laughed, and the sound was so much like her mother's that I had to close my eyes for a second. How's the orchard? Did that frost we had Thursday do any damage? Nothing serious. Few small branches down on the Honeycrisps, but the trees are dormant anyway. We fell into our usual rhythm, her telling me about her research, me telling her about the farm. Grace taught history at Washington State University's Spokane campus, specializing in medieval Europe. She visited twice a month, like clockwork, always helping out with whatever needed doing. During harvest season, she'd take a week off and work alongside me and the hired crew. And she'd never once, not once in 8 years, suggested I should think about selling the farm. She understood, the way Caroline had understood. So, Grace said, and I heard the shift in her tone, casual conversation, moving toward something more serious. Anything new happened this week? I hesitated. Took a sip of coffee that had gone lukewarm. Brandon called. Silence on the other end. Not the comfortable silence of someone thinking, but the loaded silence of someone trying to decide what to say. Did he? Grace finally said. Not a question. A statement flat and careful. A Thursday morning, out of the blue. I tried to keep my voice neutral. Said he wanted to apologize for how things went in July. Asked if they could come visit for New Year's, him and Vanessa and the kids. More silence. Then, Dad. Be careful. Careful, Grace, he's your brother. I know who he is. Her voice was still gentle, but there was steel underneath. I also know he only calls when he wants something. I felt my jaw tighten. That's not fair. People can change. Maybe he's been thinking about family. Did he sound sincere? Oh, yes. I said maybe too quickly. He sounded tired, like maybe he's been struggling with the distance between us, like he genuinely wants to make things right. I hope you're right, Dad. I really do. Grace sighed. But you need to understand something. After Mom passed away, I was here. I saw what happened. Brandon changed. Not slowly, it was almost immediate. At the funeral, he was asking you about the estate, about whether you'd had the land appraised recently. He was concerned. He was calculating. Grace's voice was sad more than angry. Dad, I love my brother. I want to believe the best about him. But his visits became different. Every time he came by, there were questions. Had developers contacted you? Had you thought about what happens to the farm when you're gone? I opened my mouth to argue, but she kept going. And then there's the money situation. Last Christmas, when I stopped by their place in Spokane with gifts for the kids, there was a notice taped to their front door. Bank letterhead. Vanessa answered the door looking stressed, and the house was tense. Ethan and Lily were quieter than usual. Something's wrong, Dad. Financially wrong. I stared down at my coffee, watching the dark surface go still. Why didn't you tell me this before? What would you have done, offered to help? You know Brandon's too proud for that. But Dad, when someone is desperate for money and their father owns land worth millions, you have to at least consider the possibility that the reconciliation might not be entirely about family healing. He's my son, I said quietly. I have to believe he's capable of change. I know, and I'm not saying don't let them come. I'm just saying, document everything. Keep a record of your conversations. If he starts asking about money or the farm or your estate plans, don't commit to anything without thinking it through. Maybe even talk to a lawyer. A lawyer, Grace. Just promise me you'll be careful. Please. The worry in her voice got to me more than the warnings had. Grace wasn't prone to drama or suspicion. If she was this concerned, maybe I needed to listen. I'll be careful, I said. I promise. Thank you. I don't want to poison this for you. If Brandon really has changed, if he genuinely wants to reconnect, that would be wonderful. But if he hasn't, just protect yourself. That's all I'm asking. After we hung up, I sat at that kitchen table for a long time, coffee growing cold, newspaper forgotten. 2 of my children. 1 warm phone call full of apologies and promises. 1 Sunday morning, warning full of concern and caution, Brandon's voice. I was wrong, Dad. Can we start over? Grace's voice, be careful. He only calls when he wants something. I wanted to believe Brandon. Wanted to believe that my son remembered what this place meant to his mother. But Grace's words kept echoing. Document everything. Something's wrong. Financially wrong. In the end, I decided I'd have to trust them both in different ways. But just in case Grace was right, I pulled out a notebook from the junk drawer and wrote down the date, the time, and everything Brandon had said on that Thursday morning call. Document everything Grace had said. So that's what I'd do. After I hung up with Grace, I couldn't settle. Her warnings echoed in my head, but so did Brandon's voice, that warmth, that apology. I needed to understand how we'd gotten here, how the distance between us had grown so wide. I found myself in the study, a small room off the living room that Caroline used to call my thinking space. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with farm manuals, tax records, and photo albums collected over 40 years. I pulled out the oldest album, forest green leather corners worn soft, and carried it to the desk by the window. Dust puffed up when I opened it. I couldn't remember the last time I'd looked through these. I flipped past the toddler photos to the ones I was really looking for Brandon, between the ages of 6 and 12, when he still loved this place the way I did. There. Brandon at 6, standing next to me in the orchard on a spring morning. He's wearing work gloves 3 sizes too big, and his smile is gap-toothed and enormous. I'd been teaching him how to prune the lower branches on the galahs, and he'd taken to it with such serious concentration. Like this dad he'd asked 100 times that morning. Just like that, buddy. I turned the page. Brandon at 8, halfway up a Honeycrisp tree, looking down at the camera with pure joy. Caroline had taken that photo, her voice calling up to him. Brandon Joseph Hargrove, you get down from there before you break your neck. Another page. Brandon at 10 during his first real harvest. His face smeared with apple juice, his arms full of Granny Smiths, looking so proud. He'd worked from sunrise to sunset that day, refusing to quit, even when I told him he could take a break. I want to help, he'd insisted. This is our farm, Dad. I'm supposed to help. And then one more Brandon at 12, standing in front of the barn, hands on his hips, in an unconscious imitation of my own stance. Caroline had written a caption below it in her neat handwriting. Brandon says he wants to run this place someday. I think he means it. I closed my eyes, feeling that familiar ache in my chest. Where did that boy go? Brandon had been a good student, good enough to get into Washington State University on a partial scholarship. He'd chosen business administration, not agriculture, which had disappointed me at first, but Caroline had been practical. Well, let him find his own way, she'd said. Maybe he'll come back to farming with business skills we never had. He'd met Vanessa during his junior year. They'd married in 2010, a small ceremony in Spokane that felt more like a business merger than a celebration. He'd started his contracting business right after graduation, residential construction, focusing on starter homes. For the first few years, he'd done well. Built 3 houses his first year, then 5, then 7. Then Caroline got sick, and everything shifted. Brandon's first visit after the funeral was in December 2016, just 3 weeks after we'd lost her. I'd expected him to want to talk about his mother, to share memories, but instead, he'd walked through the house like he was taking inventory. Have you had the property appraised recently? What's the estate plan look like? Who inherits if something happens to you? I'd been too numb to be offended, too deep in my own fog of loss to recognize what was happening. But looking back now, I could see it clearly the moment my son stopped seeing me as his father and started seeing me as an obstacle between him and something he wanted. The visits after that followed a pattern. He'd come by every few months, and somewhere in the conversation he'd circle back to the same questions. Had developers contacted me? Had I thought about what I'd do with the farm as I got older? Did I know what the land was worth now? Each time I'd shut him down. Each time the distance between us grew a little wider. But I hadn't understood the desperation behind those questions until last Christmas. Brandon had driven out, alone. We'd been sitting in the kitchen drinking coffee when his phone rang. He'd glanced at the screen, his face going tight, and excused himself to take it in the barn. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. But the barn door hadn't latched properly, and sound carries in the cold air. I just need more time. Brandon's voice strained in a way I'd never heard before. Tell him I'm good for it. Please, just another month. A pause. I know what I said. I know. But the deal fell through. Just give me until February. And I swear. His voice cracked, and I'd backed away from the window, feeling like I'd intruded on something private and shameful. Later, when Vanessa had arrived to pick him up, I'd heard them in the kitchen while I was in the living room. This is the last time, Brandon. Vanessa's voice sharp as broken glass. I can't keep covering for you. We're going to lose everything. The house, the business, everything we've built. When they came out, Vanessa's smile was brittle, and Brandon's face was pale. I'd walked them to the door, hugged my son, and watched them drive away with a sick feeling in my stomach. But I hadn't asked, hadn't wanted to know. I looked down at the photo album again, at 12-year-old Brandon promising to run this place someday. What had happened? Business failure, that much seemed clear. But how bad was it? And why hadn't he just told me? Maybe losing his mother had finally hit him, I thought. Maybe 4 months of silence had been him working through grief, realizing that life was too short to stay angry. Maybe that phone call was genuine. I wanted to believe that. Needed to believe it. I closed the album carefully and placed it back on the shelf. He's my son, I thought. Whatever's happened to him, he's still my son. That boy is still in there somewhere. I can't give up on him. As I left the study, I glanced back at the shelf. The album with young Brandon's photo on the cover, smiling, gap-toothed, and fearless. I hope you're right about wanting to start over, I said quietly. But Grace's warning whispered in the back of my mind. Be careful. Document everything. So I would. I'd give Brandon his chance. I'd let him come for New Year's, let him try to rebuild what we'd broken. But I'd also keep my eyes open. To understand which Brandon was real, the apologetic voice on the phone, or the desperate man Grace had warned me about, I had to go back to July. 4 months before that November call. 4 months before, he'd said, I'm sorry. And can we start over? 4 months to the day we stopped being father and son and became something else entirely. It was a Thursday afternoon, middle of July, the kind of heat that makes eastern Washington feel like the surface of the sun. I was in the barn checking irrigation equipment when I heard a truck coming up the drive. When I stepped outside and saw Brandon's silver Ford, my first thought was, maybe he's come to make things right. He climbed out of the truck alone. No Vanessa, no kids. Just Brandon in khakis and a polo shirt, looking every inch the successful contractor, though something in his face seemed strained. Hey, Dad. He managed a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Hope it's okay I didn't call first. Was passing through on business, thought I'd stop by. I made dinner steaks from the butcher and Wenatchee corn on the cob tomatoes from the garden. We ate on the back porch, watching the sun sink toward the Cascades. For a while, things felt almost normal. Brandon asked about the harvest projections. I told him the Honeycrisps were looking good, but the galas had taken a hit from a late frost. How are the kids? I asked. Ethan's 9 now? Just turned 9. Playing baseball this summer. Pretty good at it too. And Lily. Starting kindergarten in the fall. Can't believe how fast they're growing. Something softened in his face when he talked about his kids, and for a moment I saw the Brandon I remembered. You should have brought them, I said. They love it here in summer. His face closed off again, that brief warmth vanishing. Vanessa's busy with work. It's complicated. We finished eating as the sky turned orange and pink. Brandon helped me clear the dishes, and I made coffee. When we settled back on the porch, I waited, because I could feel it, whatever he'd really come to say, he was working up to it. Finally, he said it. "Dad, have you had the land appraised lately?" I set my coffee down carefully. "Why do you ask?" There's a developer in Spokane, really reputable guy, handled some big projects in the valley, and he's been buying up orchards." Brandon leaned forward, elbows on his knees, offering incredible terms. Cash deals well above market value, quick closings. Some of the families have been able to retire early, travel, really enjoy their lives. I didn't say anything. Just watched him. Watched the way he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "You've worked this land for 40 years, Dad. 40 years of waking up before dawn, of breaking your back, of worrying about weather and pests and prices." His voice took on a coaxing quality. "Don't you think you've earned the right to rest?" Something cold settled in my chest. "Your mother and I talked about a lot of things," I said quietly. "But the places we wanted to see, they were right here. This orchard, these trees, this life we built together." Brandon's jaw tightened. "I'm just saying you have options. You're 64. That's not old, but it's not young either. What if something happens? What if you fall off a ladder, or I'll decide when I'm ready to stop working my own land." I cut in, hearing steel creep into my voice. "Not before. Grace can't run this place." His tone sharpened. "She's a professor, Dad. She doesn't know the first thing about farming, and I've got my own business, my own family to support in Spokane. So what's the plan? You work yourself into the ground until—" He caught himself, but we both heard what he'd been about to say. "Until you're gone. Until I decide," I said, each word deliberate. "My land. My choice." The silence that fell between us was nothing like the comfortable quiet we'd shared while eating dinner. This was heavy, charged with things neither of us was saying. Brandon's hands were clenched around his coffee mug, his knuckles white. Finally, he took a breath and changed the subject. "How's the irrigation system holding up?" But the warmth was gone. We were strangers making small talk, and we both knew it. At 9 o'clock, Brandon stood up. "I'm pretty beat, Dad. Long drive. Think I'll turn in early." He went to the guest room, closed the door, and I sat alone on that porch until full dark, wondering what the hell had just happened to my family. I woke the next morning to the sound of an engine starting. I threw back the covers, pulled on yesterday's jeans, and ran outside in my undershirt and bare feet. Brandon's truck was already loaded, engine running, him behind the wheel. "Brandon." He rolled down the window. "Morning, Dad. Sorry, I've got a work emergency. Need to get back to Spokane." "A work emergency? At 6 in the morning, on a Friday?" "Stay for breakfast, at least," I said. But even as I said it, I knew it was pointless. "Can't. Really sorry. Thanks for dinner." He put the truck in gear. "Brandon, I'll call you soon." But we both knew he wouldn't. I stood there in the driveway and watched him drive away. Watched his truck disappear down the dirt road that cuts through the orchard. Watched the dust cloud rise and spread and eventually settle. I waited to see if he'd look back. If he'd lift a hand in a final wave, if he'd tap his brake lights, anything to acknowledge that this mattered, that I mattered. He didn't look back. I stood there long after the dust had settled and the sound of his engine had faded. Stood there in my bare feet on the gravel, feeling the morning chill, despite the fact that it would be 90 degrees by noon. Something had broken between us during that conversation on the porch. Something I didn't know how to fix. All I knew was that my son had driven away without looking back, and I had no idea when or if I'd see him again. I didn't know, standing there in that July dawn, that it would be 4 months before I heard his voice again. 4 months of silence. 4 months before that phone call in November, when he'd say all the right words, "I'm sorry, I was wrong. Can we start over," in a voice so warm and sincere that I'd almost believed him. Almost. August came and went in silence. I called Brandon on the 15th, left a message saying I hoped we could talk, that I didn't want our argument to define us. No callback, no text, nothing. September arrived with cooler air and the first hints of autumn in the Cascades. I called again, asking if he and the family were okay. Again, straight to voicemail. Again, silence, Grace noticed. She drove out on a Saturday afternoon in late September, found me in the garden letting weeds take over the tomatoes, something Caroline would never have tolerated. "Dad," she said, hands in her jacket pockets. "When's the last time you heard from Brandon?" "July." She was quiet for a moment. "Then he's punishing you, you know, for saying no." But I couldn't shake the feeling that a better father would have found the right words, the right compromise. The first incident happened on a Thursday in early November. I was bringing in firewood from the shed, an armload of split oak. My boot came down on the third board from the door. The board gave way. I stumbled, dropped the wood, grabbed the porch railing to keep from going down. My heart hammered as I stood there, 1 foot half through the gap where the board had lifted. I examined the damage. The board looked fine. No rot, no visible cracks. But when I checked underneath, all 4 screws that should have been holding it were gone. Not loose. Not stripped. Gone. "That's odd," I said aloud. "Must have forgotten to tighten them last time I did repairs." I found screws in my toolbox and secured the board properly. I didn't think about it again. 4 days later, I took a morning shower. The water came out fine at first. Normal temperature, good pressure. I'd just gotten my hair wet when the temperature spiked. It went from comfortable to scalding in a heartbeat. I jerked back with a shout, slipped on the wet tile, caught myself on the shower curtain rod. My shoulder, where the water had hit, burned like I'd been branded. After drying off, I went down to the basement to check the water heater. The thermostat dial was turned all the way to the right. Maximum. 160 degrees Fahrenheit. I always kept it at 120. Always. I stared at that dial for a full minute. Could I have bumped it somehow? I turned it back to 120, applied burn cream to my shoulder, and tried to convince myself that I wasn't losing my mind. 3 days after that, I needed rope from the barn loft. I climbed the wooden ladder slowly and pulled myself up into the dim space. I spotted the rope in the far corner and walked across the loft boards to get it. My boot came down on the 3rd plank from the ladder. It shifted, like a trap door that wasn't supposed to open yet. I froze, every muscle locking. Very slowly, I shifted my weight backward onto the previous plank and knelt down to examine the board. The nails were lifted. All 4 framing nails pulled up about a 1/4 inch. When I looked at the wood around them, I could see fresh tool marks where something had been wedged underneath to lever them up. Then I looked down through the gap beside it. 12 feet. Straight drop to the concrete floor of the barn. I backed away on my hands and knees, not trusting any of the boards now, until I was safely on the ladder. My heart was trying to punch its way out of my chest. Someone had pried those nails up. Recently. Someone had been in my barn. I walked back to the house in a daze and called Grace. I told her everything. All 3 incidents laid out one after another. Her response was immediate. "Dad, call the police, right now." "What if I'm imagining things?" "Dad." Her voice was gentle but firm. 3 accidents in a week. That's not paranoia. Someone is doing this. We talked for another 10 minutes, Grace trying to convince me resisting. In the end, I told her I'd think about it. She made me promise to at least change the locks. I drove into Wenatchee and bought new locks at the hardware store. Spent the rest of the afternoon installing them. Climbed back up to the barn loft and hammered those nails down properly. By the time I was done, the sun was setting, and I felt slightly ridiculous. The next morning, my phone rang. Brandon's name on the screen. For a second, I just stared at it. 4 months of silence, and now, I answered. Huh. His voice was warm, warmer than it had been in July. Dad, I'm sorry. I've been thinking a lot, and I was wrong. About July, about pushing you. I shouldn't have done that. The apology I'd been waiting for. I was wondering, he continued, if maybe we could come see you for New Year's. All of us, Vanessa, Ethan, Lily. Start fresh. Would that be okay? My suspicion, the fear that had been building over the past week, melted like frost in sunlight. That would be wonderful, I heard myself say. Maybe I had been paranoid. Maybe the accidents were just that, accidents. Maybe my son really had spent 4 months thinking about our relationship and decided to try again. After we hung up, I stood there with the phone in my hand, feeling something like hope for the first time in months. Grace's warning whispered in my memory, he only calls when he wants something. But I pushed it aside. My son was coming home for New Year's. We were going to start fresh. Everything was going to be fine. 2 weeks passed in relative peace. Brandon called once more mid-December to confirm the New Year's plans. His voice was cheerful, asking what the kids should bring, whether Ethan needed snow boots for playing in the orchard. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, like maybe I still had a family. On December 18th, I drove into Wenatchee to pick up my monthly prescription refill. I'd been taking lisinopril for blood pressure since 2018, 20 milligrams once a day every morning with breakfast. Paul Richmond, the pharmacist at Wenatchee Family Pharmacy for 30 years, always had it ready for me on the 18th. "Some morning, Tom?" Paul handed me the white paper bag across the counter. "How's the orchard?" "Quiet this time of year. Brandon's coming for New Year's with his family." Paul's eyebrows rose. He knew about the estrangement. "That's good. Family's important." I paid, took the bag, drove home. That evening I took my pill with dinner. I was standing at the kitchen sink, glass of water and one-hand pill bottle in the other, when I first noticed. I'd shaken a pill into my palm and was about to toss it back when something made me pause. The shape was right oval, scored down the middle. But the color was off. Instead of the pale pink I'd been taking for years, this pill was chalky white. Must be a generic brand change, I thought. Pharmacies did that sometimes. I swallowed it and thought nothing more about it. The next morning I woke up lightheaded. Not enough to worry about. I'd worked too long in the cold. Low blood sugar, probably. I made myself eat oatmeal and felt a little better. By afternoon, though, the nausea had started. A queasy rolling in my stomach that made me skip lunch. December 20th, I woke to the room spinning. I sat up too fast, and the ceiling tilted like I was on a boat. I gripped the edge of the mattress until things steadied, then made my way downstairs, carefully, one hand on the wall. The nausea was worse. I couldn't face food. Just coffee sipped slowly while sitting very still. Around noon, climbing the stairs to check a leaking faucet left me breathless and sweating. My heart was pounding, racing like I'd just run a mile. "Must be the flu," I said aloud. "Just need rest." But I hadn't had a fever. This didn't feel like flu. This felt wrong. On the morning of December 21st, I nearly passed out in the barn. I'd gone out to check on the tractor. I was standing beside it, hand on the hood, when the dizziness hit like a wave. The barn lurched sideways. My vision went gray at the edges, narrowing to a tunnel. I grabbed for the nearest support beam, and missed, went down on one knee on the concrete floor. My heart was doing something it had never done before, skipping beats, then racing to catch up, then skipping again. Irregular, frantic. I stayed there on my knees for what felt like 10 minutes, head down, breathing slow and deep, waiting for the world to stop tilting. When I finally felt steady enough to stand, I walked very carefully back to the house and sat heavily at the kitchen table. This wasn't flu. Something was wrong. I went upstairs to the bathroom and opened the medicine cabinet. There in the back was my old lisinopril bottle from October. I'd meant to throw it away, but never had. I carried both bottles downstairs and set them side by side on the kitchen table in the bright afternoon light. From the old bottle, I shook out one of the 3 remaining pills. Pale pink. Smooth coating. Clear imprint Lisinopril 20. From the new bottle, I shook out another pill. Chalky white. Rough, almost powdery coating. The imprint was there, but smudged. I held them both up to the window light. They weren't even close to the same. My chest went tight, pure cold fear. I picked up my phone and called the pharmacy. 20 minutes later, I was standing in the pharmacy, both pill bottles on the counter. Paul had closed the door to the consultation room. He took one of the white pills and examined it under his desk lamp. Then he did something that made my stomach drop. He scraped lightly at the coating with his thumbnail. A fine white powder came away. This is chalk-based," he said quietly. "Lisinopril uses a polymer coating. It shouldn't powder like this." He picked up a magnifying glass, held it over the white pill. "See how this imprint is smudged? Like someone pressed it into a soft mold, not stamped it mechanically. The real pharmaceutical imprints are clean, precise. This is crude." He looked at me, his face pale. "Tom, these are counterfeit. Someone replaced your medication. You need to stop taking these immediately, and you need to call the police." My hands were shaking. I looked down at the two bottles, pink pills that had kept my blood pressure stable for years. White pills that had made me dizzy, nauseous, that had nearly made me pass out in my own barn. I thought about the porch board with missing screws, the scalding shower, the barn loft with lifted nails. 4 incidents now. 4 times someone had created a situation that could have hurt me. But this was different. This was about making me take something into my body. "I'll seal this bottle," Paul said, already getting an evidence bag. "You can't take any more of these. I'm contacting the state pharmacy board today. But Tom, listen to me. You need to file a police report. This isn't a mistake. Someone did this deliberately." I nodded, not trusting my voice. I took the sealed bag, left the pharmacy, and sat in my truck in the parking lot for a long time. Someone had tampered with my medication. Someone had put pills in a bottle with my name on it. I pulled out my phone. I thought about Brandon's warm voice 2 weeks ago. "I'm sorry, Dad. Can we start over?" I thought about how my suspicions had melted when I'd heard that apology. I'd been wrong. Someone was trying to hurt me, and I couldn't keep pretending otherwise. I sat in my kitchen for 20 minutes after leaving the pharmacy, staring at the sealed evidence bag. The white pills inside looked harmless through the plastic. Innocent. Finally, I pulled out my phone and called Grace. She answered on the first ring. "Dad, what's wrong?" "Grace, I need you to come here. Now. Don't tell Brandon. Don't tell anyone. Just come." There was a pause. Then, I'm grabbing my keys. "What happened?" "Just come, please." She made the drive from Spokane in an hour and 20 minutes. I heard her car pull up just before noon and met her at the door. One look at my face and she pulled me into a hug. "Dad, you're scaring me. What's going on?" I'd laid everything out on the kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene. The sealed bag with the counterfeit pills. My old prescription bottle with the real lisinopril for comparison. Printed photos I'd taken close-ups of the porch board with missing screws, the barn loft plank with lifted nails, the water heater thermostat cranked to maximum, and the notebook where I'd documented dates and incidents. Grace set her purse down slowly and approached the table. She picked up each piece, examined it, set it down carefully. Her face went from concerned to focused to something harder, colder. "When did Brandon visit last?" she asked. "Oh, July, right after our argument. He came alone. So he had access to the house, the barn, your medication cabinet, I suppose, but Grace..." "Dad." She looked at me then, and I saw Caroline in her eyes, that same fierce protectiveness. "This isn't random. Look at the pattern. 4 incidents all within 2 months. All things that could hurt you, but that might look like accidents." She picked up the sealed bag with the pills. "Except this. This is different. You can explain away a loose board, a bumped thermostat. But switching out medication, that's not an accident. That's planned. That's calculated." She turned to face me fully. Dad, Brandon is trying to hurt you. The words hung in the air between us. I'd been thinking it, but hearing Grace say it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. My son, I said, and my voice broke on the word is trying to hurt me. I didn't realize I was crying until Grace's arms were around me again. How did we get here? The words came out muffled against her shoulder. How did that boy who used to climb apple trees turn into someone who would... I couldn't finish. I don't know, Dad. Grace's voice was tight. I don't know, but we're going to stop him. I pulled back, wiped my eyes. What if I'm wrong? What if it's not him? Who else had access to everything? Who else knows your routines, your medication schedule, the layout of your property? Who else benefits if something happens to you? I knew she was right. But we need help, Grace said, pulling out her phone. Professional help. We need the state police, their elder abuse unit. She was already scrolling through her contacts, then dialing. Washington State Police, how may I direct your call? Elder Abuse Unit, please. A series of clicks. Then Elder Abuse Division. This is Detective Bennett. Grace took a breath. Detective Bennett, my name is Grace Hargrove. My father is 64 years old, lives alone on a farm in Wenatchee Valley. We have evidence of multiple incidents of tampering with his property and medication. We believe a family member is involved. There was a pause. Is your father in immediate danger? We don't think so. Not right this moment. But the incidents have been escalating. Can you come to the station? We're in Wenatchee. Is there any way you could come here? I think seeing the property, the evidence in context would help. Another pause. I'm working Christmas Day anyway. I can be there the morning of the 25th. Will that work? Grace looked at me. I nodded. Yes. Thank you. Grace gave her my address, answered a few more questions, then ended the call. Okay. Detective Bennett will be here Christmas morning to start the investigation. She'll do it quietly, won't file an official report yet. We don't want to tip off Brandon that we know. Grace, what are we doing? Then we catch him. Her voice was firm. Dad, you still invited Brandon for New Year's, right? Yes, but we don't cancel. Act completely normal. He calls you're friendly. You give him no reason to think anything has changed. Detective Bennett will install surveillance cameras, probably monitoring equipment. We'll have professionals watching. And Dad, she reached across the table, took my hand. You won't be alone. I'm staying. You're supposed to visit the Richardsons for Christmas. I'll call them. They'll understand. You're more important than any plan. She started making calls. When she was done, she looked exhausted. I'll take the guest room, she said. I need to grab my bag from the car. Did you eat lunch? I shook my head. I'll make something. After she went outside, I sat alone at the table with all the evidence spread in front of me. I picked up my phone, opened my messages. Scrolled back to November, to the last text Brandon had sent. Can't wait to see you, Dad. And then a small red heart. Brandon hadn't sent one in years. Not since Caroline passed away. But that November text had one. I'd thought it meant he was trying to rebuild what we'd lost. Now I understood. That warmth, the apology, the invitation, the heart, it was all part of it. A weapon disguised as affection. Grace came back in with her overnight bag. Gracie, I said quietly. How do you protect yourself from your own child? She set the bag down and came to sit beside me. By remembering that the person trying to hurt you isn't the child you raised. He's someone else now. Someone we need to stop. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Detective Bennett will be here Christmas morning. We'll make a plan. We'll gather evidence. And we'll make sure he can't hurt you again. I looked at my daughter and felt something like hope cut through the fear. Thank you, I said, for coming, for believing me, for everything. She hugged me again. Always, Dad, always. Christmas morning came cold and clear, the kind of winter day that makes eastern Washington look like a postcard blue sky, white peaks, frost glittering on everything. Grace and I were drinking coffee at the kitchen table when we heard the car pull up at 10 o'clock exactly. Not a patrol car, but an unmarked sedan, dark gray. The woman who got out was in her early 40s, with short, dark hair and sharp eyes that took in the property in a single sweep. She wore jeans, boots, and a dark jacket with a badge clipped to her belt. Grace opened the door before she could knock. "Detective Bennett?" "That's right." She held out a hand. "You must be Grace. And Mr. Hargrove, thank you for letting me come on Christmas." "I appreciate you coming at all," I said. "Can I get you some coffee?" "That would be great, thanks." She sat at the kitchen table, pulled out a leather notebook and a small recording device. "I'm Detective Laura Bennett, Washington State Police Elder Abuse and Vulnerable Persons Unit. I've been doing this for 15 years. I want you to know that you did the right thing by calling, and we're going to take this seriously." Something in my chest loosened at those words. "Call me Tom," I said, setting a mug of coffee in front of her. "Saluman, then. I need you to walk me through everything. Is it okay if I record this?" I nodded. She clicked on the recorder. I told her everything. Started with Brandon as a boy. Moved to Caroline's passing and how Brandon's visits had changed. The July argument. The 4 months of silence. The November phone call. And finally the incidents, the porch board, the scalding shower, the barn loft, the pills. Bennett took notes steadily, occasionally stopping me to ask clarifying questions. When I finished, she clicked off the recorder. "Thank you. I know that wasn't easy." She examined each piece of evidence with methodical attention. The pills were first. She held the sealed bag to the light-made notes. "I'm sending these to the state toxicology lab today. We should have results within 48 hours. She pulled out an evidence label. "Until we know what's in these, you don't take any medication without having it verified." "Understand?" I nodded. Bennett stood up. "Show me the barn." We walked out into the cold morning. In the barn loft, she knelt beside the repaired board and examined the one next to it, the one with the nail holes still visible. She pulled out her phone, took close-up photographs measured with a small tape measure. These nails were extracted approximately 3/4 of an inch. The board would have supported minimal weight before catastrophic failure. She looked at me. "The fall height from here to the barn floor is 12 feet 3 inches. Concrete surface. Survival rate for a 64-year-old male from that height onto concrete less than 30%. My stomach turned over. Back in the kitchen, she documented the water heater and the porch board with the same methodical attention. When she was done, she sat back down. "Tom, I want you to understand what we're looking at here. Elder financial abuse typically follows a pattern. It starts with pressure questions about assets inheritance. When the victim refuses to comply, the abuser escalates, creates situations that look like accidents. And when those don't work," she gestured to the pill bottle, "they move to more direct methods. The phone call in November," Grace said. "That was part of it, wasn't it? Young classic grooming behavior. The goal is to lower the victim's defenses, rebuild trust, create an opportunity." Bennett looked at me. That warm, apologetic call, that invitation to New Year's that was calculated. I felt cold all over. Bennett reached for her bag and pulled out a manila folder. "I obtained a warrant yesterday for Brandon's financial records." She slid several sheets of paper across the table. "Your son filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy on April 18th of this year. Total liabilities, $580,000. Of that amount, $280,000 is owed to Riverside Casino in Spokane, an illegal underground gambling operation with documented ties to organized crime." Grace made a small sound. "He's in debt to criminals." "He is. Additionally, there are 2 liens on his house. Foreclosure proceedings began in September. His contracting business has collapsed multiple lawsuits from clients for incomplete work breach of contract. The papers blurred. Brandon is facing financial ruin, Bennett continued, and potentially physical danger from the people he owes money to. Your property worth between $3.5 and $4.2 million represents his only way out. I thought about Brandon's voice on the phone. I was wrong, Dad. Can we start over? I thought about that little red heart at the end of his text message. He was going to let me disappear, I said. Make it look like an accident. Then he'd inherit, pay off his debts, and no one would ever know. Bennett didn't deny it. What do we do? I asked. How do we stop him? Bennett closed the folder. We let him come for New Year's. You act completely normal, friendly, welcoming. I'll install hidden cameras in the barn and inside the house. When he makes his move, we'll have video evidence. And Tom, you won't be alone. I'll have officers positioned nearby. We'll be monitoring everything. Can you do that? Can you act natural around him, knowing what you know? I thought about Carolyn, about this land we'd built together, about Grace sitting beside me. I can do it, I said, for as long as it takes. Bennett stood up, began packing her evidence bags. I'll be back tomorrow to install the surveillance equipment. The lab will have the pill analysis by the 27th. By New Year's Eve, we'll be ready. She paused at the door. Tom, I know this is hard. I know he's your son. But the person who's coming here for New Year's, that's not the child you raised. That's someone else. Someone we need to stop. After she left, Grace and I sat in the silent kitchen. Dad, Grace said quietly, we're going to get through this. I nodded. But all I could think about was that little red heart at the end of Brandon's message, and how something that used to mean love had become the symbol of a threat I never saw coming. If you've made it this far, let me know you're still here. Comment alone if you believe Brandon planned everything by himself, or manipulated if you think someone was controlling him from the shadows. Quick reminder, upcoming scenes contain dramatized elements that may not reflect exact events. If you'd rather not continue, now is a good time to pause. 2 days after Christmas, Detective Bennett returned with a folder twice as thick as before. Grace and I were at the kitchen table when we heard her car pull up. Through the window, I watched her get out folder tucked under one arm, expression serious. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Tom, Grace, there's someone else involved. Someone I need you to know about. I felt my stomach drop. Someone else. Bennett opened the folder and spread several sheets across the table. At the top was a DMV photograph of a woman I'd never seen before. Dark hair, sharp cheekbones, eyes that looked intelligent and cold. Mid-30s. Professional clothing. This is Diane Crane, Bennett said. 35 years old, resident of Phoenix, Arizona. According to her social media, she's an investment consultant specializing in real estate portfolios. Bennett pulled out another sheet, a criminal background check with multiple entries. In reality, her Arizona real estate license was revoked in 2021 for fraudulent transactions. She has convictions for wire fraud in 2019, check kiting in 2020, and she's currently under investigation for identity theft in multiple states. I stared at the documents. What does she have to do with Brandon? Everything, Bennett said quietly. Your son has been involved with this woman since June, and I believe she's the one who orchestrated this entire plan. Bennett laid out phone records, pages of call logs, and text message metadata. Since June 14th, there have been 247 documented communications between Brandon's cell phone and Diane Crane's number. They started slow in June. By July, they were talking 30 times a month. By December, it was daily. She pulled out a calendar marked with highlighter. June 14th, your son attended a real estate networking event in Spokane. Diane Crane was a featured speaker on creative financing for distressed properties. Distressed properties, Grace said. You mean properties owned by people in financial trouble? Exactly. She targets vulnerable people, usually middle-aged men with business failures, gambling problems, debt. She gains their trust, then manipulates them into criminal activity while positioning herself to benefit. Bennett pulled out printed photographs from social media. The first showed Brandon and Diane at what looked like a casino. They were smiling, his arm around her shoulders. August 20th, Riverside Casino in Spokane. The same establishment where your son now owes $280,000. The second photo was from Las Vegas. Brandon and Diane again closer this time, his hand on her waist. September 15th, a weekend trip to Las Vegas. Your son charged $4,000 to a credit card that was already maxed out. I couldn't look away from the photos. He was having an affair. Yes, and I believe Diane Crane encouraged his gambling, got him deeper in debt, made him more desperate, more dependent on her for a solution. Grace's voice was tight. Does Vanessa know? Bennett shook her head. I spoke with her on the 25th. She has no idea about the affair. She believes Brandon has been working extra hours trying to save the business. She knows about the financial stress but thinks it's temporary. She and your grandchildren are victims in this too. I felt something loosen in my chest. At least Vanessa and Ethan and Lily weren't part of this nightmare. Bennett pulled out text message transcripts printed in small type. These are the most damning pieces of evidence. She laid them out one by one. The first was dated November 10th, from Diane Crane to Brandon. He needs to trust you. Be warm. Make him believe. This only works if he invites you back. November 10th, the day before Brandon had called me with that warm, apologetic voice. She coached him, Grace said, her voice shaking. That whole call, the apology, the invitation, she told him what to say. The second text was dated December 20th, from Brandon to Diane. He took the pills. Should affect him soon. My hands trembled. That was the day after I'd picked up the prescription. The day I'd started feeling dizzy and sick. The third text made my blood go cold. December 22nd, from Diane Crane to Brandon. If he's still alive by New Year's, we'll use Plan B. No more delays. The Plan B, I said. What's Plan B? We don't know yet, Bennett admitted. But it suggests they had backup plans if the medication didn't work fast enough. She pulled out more text transcripts, dozens of them spanning June through December. A chronicle of conspiracy. June, Diane coaching Brandon on pressuring me about selling. Don't push too hard at first. Plant seeds. July, planning the visit. Go alone. No witnesses. Get access to his house, his routine. Find weaknesses. November, instructions for the warm call. Apologize without explaining. Promise a fresh start. He'll want to believe you. December, the final phase. The pills will take a week, maybe two. When he's weakened, the fall will look natural and running through multiple messages. Once this is done, we're free. You pay off the debts, we disappear together. Mexico, maybe. I set down the papers. My son's words. His plan. So Brandon didn't think of this alone. I said. No. Bennett said. Diane Crane has a history of this. She finds vulnerable men, isolates them, makes them dependent on her, then directs them toward criminal activity. But Tom, your son, made choices. He's 40 years old. He chose to get involved with this woman. He chose to listen to her. He chose to tamper with your medication. Diane Crane is the primary offender, but Brandon is responsible for his actions. I knew she was right. What happens to her? Grace asked. We're arresting both of them. On January 1st, at the same time we arrest Brandon here, Phoenix police will pick up Diane Crane in Arizona. Coordinated arrests mean neither can warn the other. After she left, I sat at the table staring at Diane Crane's DMV photo. This woman who'd looked at my son and seen opportunity, But even as I stared at her cold eyes, I couldn't make myself believe she was the only one responsible. Brandon had written those texts. Brandon had tampered with my medication. Brandon had chosen this path. Diane Crane might have opened the door, but my son had walked through it willingly. The next evening, Grace and I sat at the kitchen table watching Bennett's team install the last surveillance camera in the barn when her phone rang. "It's the state lab," she said, setting the phone on speaker. "You need to hear this." "This is Dr. Sarah Collins, Washington State Toxicology Lab." A woman's voice came through, professional and precise. "I'm calling with results on the medication sample submitted December 25th. I stared at the phone. Those pills that had made me dizzy and sick. We analyzed the sample using mass spectrometry and gas chromatography. The findings are definitive. Dr. Collins paused. Sample contained potassium chloride at 40 milliequivalents per dose and hydrochlorothiazide at 25 milligrams. Expected composition for the labeled medication, lisinopril, was completely absent. This is a total substitution, zero therapeutic medication present. And Bennett leaned forward. Can you explain the significance? Potassium chloride at this dosage would significantly elevate blood potassium levels. The hydrochlorothiazide would exacerbate potassium retention. Together they create hyperkalemia, dangerously elevated potassium in the bloodstream. In a 64-year-old male with hypertension symptoms, would include irregular heartbeat, muscle weakness, nausea, difficulty breathing, and progressive cardiac arrhythmia. If ingestion continued for 7 to 10 days, the likely outcome would be cardiac arrest, most probably during sleep. My hands were shaking. 7 to 10 days. I'd taken those pills for 3 days. Would the cause be apparent in an autopsy? Bennett asked. That depends on timing. Hyperkalemia is difficult to detect post-mortem because potassium levels change rapidly after death. A standard examination would likely conclude cardiac arrest in an elderly patient with hypertension, essentially natural causes. Unless someone specifically suspected poisoning and requested advanced toxicological screening, the substitution would go undetected. Thank you, doctor. Can you have the written report to me by tomorrow morning? It'll be in your inbox by 8 a.m. Detective Bennett. Dr. Collins paused. I've been doing this for 12 years. This is sophisticated. Whoever made these pills knew exactly what they were doing. Oh! After Bennett ended the call, silence filled the kitchen. Grace's face had gone pale. Dad, if you'd kept taking them. She didn't finish. Didn't need to. Bennett opened her notebook. Let me walk you through what we believe was his plan. You take your blood pressure medication every morning at breakfast. 7 o'clock like clockwork. Brandon knew that. The substituted pills were designed to work slowly. Not immediately poisonous that would raise suspicion, but cumulative, progressive. She continued, her voice gentle but relentless. After 1 week, you'd be increasingly weak, dizzy. Your heart would be skipping beats. You'd probably attribute it to age or stress. After 2 weeks, your potassium levels would be critically high. Your heart would fail, most likely at night in your sleep. You'd simply not wake up one morning. Grace made a small sound. Tom would be found in his bed. 64-year-old farmer, apparent heart attack. The coroner would perform a standard examination. No signs of trauma. Conclusion, natural causes. No autopsy unless someone specifically requested one. And if Brandon did, Bennett met my eyes. He'd do it publicly, playing the grieving son. But he'd know it wouldn't find anything suspicious. He planned every detail, Grace said. He and Diane Crane did, yes. The texts show they discussed the timeline. They expected results within 2 weeks, right around New Year's. The visit was cover, the loving son spending holidays with his elderly father. And if something tragic happened during that visit, he'd be right there. The first to find you. The first to call 911. I thought about Brandon's warm voice on the phone. I'm sorry, Dad. Can we start over? All of it calculated to get me to trust him long enough to finish what he'd started. Bennett pulled out a different folder. Here's what happens next. December 30th evening. Brandon arrives with his family. You act completely normal, friendly, welcoming. No indication anything has changed. She spread out photos of surveillance equipment. 2 cameras in the barn, 1 in the kitchen, hidden in the smoke detector, 1 in your bedroom. Audio recording throughout. We'll be monitoring from a van a quarter-mile down the road, close enough to reach you in under 30 seconds if needed. What if he tries something the first night? I asked. Then we arrest him that night. But based on the texts with Diane, we believe he'll wait until New Year's Eve or New Year's Day. They discussed having a backup plan if you were still here by New Year's. My chest felt tight. What about Ethan and Lily? Tom. Bennett's voice was firm. Brandon's entire plan relies on this appearing natural, accidental. That's why he chose pills that would mimic a heart attack. That's why he's bringing his family. Harming his children would destroy that cover completely. They're not in danger from him. They're part of his alibi. I wanted to believe her. 72 hours, Tom. That's all we need. 3 days of acting normal. And then on January 1st at 7 a.m., we end this. Brandon will be arrested here. Phoenix PD will arrest Diane Crane simultaneously. Neither will have a chance to warn the other. She stood to leave. You're doing the right thing. I know it doesn't feel like it, but you're protecting yourself, your property, and potentially saving other people from becoming Diane Crane's next targets. After she left Grace and I sat in the kitchen as darkness fell. Just 1 more week, Grace said softly. Then it's over. I looked at Caroline's photograph on the mantel, the one where she was holding infant Brandon. I'm doing this for you, I said to her image. For the land you loved. For everything we made together. Grace squeezed my hand. She'd be proud of you, Dad. But as I sat there with surveillance cameras hidden in my walls, one question haunted me. When Brandon arrived in 2 days with his children, and his warm smile, and his promises of a fresh start, could I really sit across from him at my dinner table and act like nothing was wrong? I didn't know, but in 72 hours, I'd have to try. December 30th came too fast. I stood at the kitchen window at 4 o'clock, watching the road through the orchard. Grace stood beside me, her hand on my shoulder. You can do this, she said quietly. Then I saw the truck, silver familiar, kicking up dust as it came down the drive. They're here, Grace said. I took a breath and opened the door before Brandon could knock, forcing my face into something that might pass for a welcoming smile. Dad. He stepped forward and pulled me into a hug. It's so good to see you. I've missed this place. I made myself hug him back, made myself not stiffen, even though every instinct screamed to put distance between us. His arms felt wrong, like hugging a dangerous stranger. Good to see you too, I managed. Vanessa came up next, moving slowly, looking thinner and tired. Behind her, Ethan hung back near the truck hands in his pockets. 9 years old now, all long limbs and nervous energy. Then Lily came running, 6 years old and fearless, and threw herself at me with wholehearted trust. Grandpa, we're here. Can we see the apples? Can we see the barn? I picked her up, and she wrapped her arms around my neck, and I had to close my eyes because the weight of what I was doing threatened to break me. These children had no idea that in less than 48 hours, their world would shatter. Sure, sweetheart, I said. After dinner, we'll walk around. Grace's car pulled up 10 minutes later. We'd choreographed this, and she came in playing surprised. Oh, Brandon, I didn't know you'd be here. Brandon's expression flickered something cold and calculating, but then he smiled. Grace. Yeah, Dad invited us for New Year's. The tension between them was subtle but unmistakable. Brandon didn't like that Grace was here. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened. While they got settled upstairs, I heard Lily's voice drifting down. Daddy, can we build a snowman tomorrow if it snows? Brandon's response warm and gentle. Sure, princess, whatever you want. I stood in the kitchen listening and felt something crack inside me. How could the same man who spoke to his daughter with such tenderness be the same man who'd switched out my medication? Grace touched my arm. Don't try to understand it, Dad. Just focus on getting through the next 48 hours. Dinner was the hardest thing I'd done in 64 years. I'd cooked the kind of meal Caroline used to make roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, apple pie. We sat down with careful civility, the kids' energy providing cover for the adults' careful dance. How were the apples this year? Vanessa asked. Good crop, I said, keeping my voice steady. The Honey Crisps did especially well. Brandon cut his chicken carefully. I remember when you planted those trees. I must have been, 12, 13. He'd been 13, and he'd helped me dig the holes, and Caroline had made lemonade. 13, I said. You helped me dig the holes. Brandon smiled, that warm, nostalgic smile that would have fooled anyone who didn't know what I knew. Good memory, Dad. I wanted to scream. Instead, I took a bite of chicken and tried not to choke on it. After the kids ran off to play, Brandon set down his fork and looked at me with false concern. Dad, have you thought more about the future? Maybe we should talk about estate planning, just in case anything happens. It would give me peace of mind knowing you have everything in order. The table went quiet. I remembered Bennett's instructions. Act natural. Don't refuse outright, but don't commit. Let's enjoy the holiday first, I said. We'll talk about it after New Year's. No rush. Brandon's eyes flickered frustration, but his smile stayed in place. Sure, Dad. No rush. Grace's foot found mine under the table. You're doing great, but I'd seen the tension in Brandon's shoulders when I'd deflected. He was impatient. The plan wasn't moving fast enough. After dinner, while Vanessa helped with dishes, Brandon found me in the kitchen. Dad, can I check the barn tomorrow? Every muscle went rigid. The barn. Yeah. Remember in July I noticed some boards looked loose. I want to make sure it's safe, especially if the kids are going to play in there on that tire swing. I forced myself to look at him, to meet his eyes. Sure, I heard myself say. That's thoughtful of you. No problem. I'll take a look first thing in the morning. He patted my shoulder and walked away whistling. I stood frozen until I saw Grace in the doorway with her phone. A moment later, my phone buzzed. He's going for the barn, I'm telling Bennett. The evening dragged on with false normalcy. Brandon and Vanessa got the kids ready for bed. I heard Lily's protests. Just 5 more minutes. And Brandon reading a bedtime story, his voice gentle and calm. When they came back downstairs, we made small talk about nothing that mattered. Weather, Christmas, Ethan's baseball, all performance while hidden cameras recorded everything. At 9 o'clock, Brandon yawned. Long drive. Think I'll turn in. He hugged me goodnight, actually hugged me, and I made myself return it without flinching. Sleep well, Dad. You too. After he went upstairs, I sank onto the couch, like my strings had been cut. Grace sat beside me. You did great, Dad. You really did. I don't know if I can do this for 2 more days. I said, my voice rough, pretending I don't know what he's planning. You can, because you have to. Because in 48 hours, this will be over. Brandon will be arrested. Diane Crane will be arrested. And you'll be safe. I looked at Caroline's photograph. I'm doing this for you, I whispered. For the land you loved. I hope you understand why. Grace squeezed my hand. She does, Dad. But as I climbed the stairs that night, passing the closed door where my son slept peacefully, I couldn't shake one terrible thought. What if something went wrong? What if Bennett's plan failed? What if Brandon succeeded before we could stop him? I locked my bedroom door, something I'd never done before, and lay awake in the dark, listening to the house settle and the winter wind, wondering if I'd see another sunrise, wondering if my son would let me. If you're still watching, here's a question type 1. If you think Tom should confront Brandon directly tonight, or 2, if he should wait for the hidden cameras to catch him in the act. A gentle note: what comes next includes some creative storytelling choices. If that doesn't sit well with you, this is your moment to step away. Morning came slowly, like even the sun didn't want to face what the day would bring. I'd barely slept. Every sound in the old house seemed amplified. Around 5 a.m., I gave up and went downstairs to make coffee, sitting at the kitchen table in the dark. By 9, Vanessa was making pancakes, humming cheerfully, completely unaware. Ethan and Lily sat coloring, excited about midnight fireworks. Brandon came down last, showered and smiling. "Morning, Dad. Sleep okay?" I forced myself to meet his eyes. Well enough. He poured coffee, leaned against the counter. "I'm going to check that barn board this morning. Get it taken care of before the kids start playing out there." My heart stopped. This was it. My back's been acting up. I said exactly like Bennett had coached me. "You go ahead. Just be careful." "No problem, Dad. Won't take long." He headed out toward the barn. The clock read 10:15. I sat with Grace, a plate of pancakes in front of me that I couldn't eat. Grace's hand found mine under the table, squeezed once. Hard. 25 minutes passed. At 10:35, Brandon came in, brushing sawdust off his jeans, looking pleased. "All fixed, Dad. Board's solid now. Should be safe for the kids." Thank you," I managed. Grace's phone buzzed. She looked down, relief crossed her face. Later, she whispered, "Bennett got it. All of it. She'll come tonight to show us the footage." The afternoon dragged. Brandon took the kids to the ridge, playing the loving father. Vanessa helped me prepare dinner, making strained small talk. At 7 o'clock, Bennett slipped inside, carrying a tablet. "We need to talk. Somewhere private." In my study, she set the tablet on the desk. "You need to see this. So there's no doubt, no room for second-guessing yourself." She pressed play. The barn loft. Timestamp 10:17 a.m. Brandon appeared at the top of the ladder, glanced back toward the door, then moved to the third plank, the one I'd repaired last week. He pulled out a small crowbar. My breath caught. He knelt beside the board I'd fixed, wedged the crowbar underneath and applied pressure. The new nails groaned, lifted. He worked carefully until the nails were 3/4 out. Then he tested the board with his hand, pressed down. It flexed but didn't break. He nodded, satisfied, and pulled out his phone. The camera caught the screen as he typed, "Trap reset. Tomorrow morning suggest we check barn together. Accident." And then he smiled. My son smiled while planning my end. A cold, satisfied smile I'd never seen before. He stood up, dusted off his hands, and climbed down like he'd just finished a routine repair job. The video ended. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Grace took the tablet, finished watching. When it ended, she looked at me with tears streaming down her face. "Dad, we have him. We have everything we need." Bennett's voice was gentle but firm. This footage, combined with the counterfeit medication, the text messages, it's airtight. Tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., we arrest him. I nodded numbly, but all I could see was that smile. Dinner was a special kind of torment. I'd prepared a traditional New Year's Eve meal: roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, apple crisp. Brandon insisted on opening champagne, pouring glasses for everyone. He raised his in a toast. To new beginnings, to family, to fresh starts, and better years ahead. Everyone drank. I could barely swallow. All I could think was, he's toasting my passing. Then Ethan asked the question that nearly broke me. "Grandpa, what's your New Year's resolution?" I looked at my grandson and told him the truth. "To protect what matters most. Brandon raised his glass again. That's good, Dad. Family is everything, right? I looked at this man with my son's face who had become something I didn't recognize. Right. Everything. As midnight approached, we gathered around the television showing Times Square. Lily climbed onto my lap. Brandon stood by the window with his champagne glass. The crowd started counting down from 10. 10, 9, 8. Lily joined in, excited. I looked at Brandon. He turned and looked back at me, raising his glass. Dad, this year is going to be full of changes. Big changes. The double meaning hung in the air like poison. 4, 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year. Fireworks erupted across the valley. Grace came to me and whispered, Almost over, Dad. Almost over. I stood up, unable to bear another moment. I'm tired. I'm going to bed. Brandon turned from the window. Night, Dad. Sleep well. Sleep well. Like he cared. You too, I said and left. In my bedroom, I pulled out my phone. A text from Bennett had come through at Midnight Lab, confirmed pills would have been lethal within 7 to 10 days. Officers in position. Arrest is at 7 a.m. Keep your door locked. This ends in 7 hours. 7 hours. 7 hours and Brandon would be in handcuffs. I looked at Caroline's photograph on my nightstand. Tomorrow I have to face what our son became. Tomorrow I have to watch them take him away. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway. My whole body went rigid. I stared at the door, locked, thank God, and listened. The footsteps stopped right outside my room. I held my breath. Through the crack under the door, I could see a shadow. Someone standing there. Listening. Brandon, checking if I was asleep. Checking if I was vulnerable. Seconds passed. Maybe a minute. I lay down fully clothed and closed my eyes, forcing my breathing to stay slow and even. Finally, the shadow moved. The footsteps walked away. A door closed. I lay there in the dark, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. 7 hours until sunrise. 7 hours until arrest. 7 hours until I'd know if Bennett's plan worked, or if my son had one more backup plan. I didn't sleep. Just lay there counting the minutes until dawn, praying I'd live to see it, praying my grandchildren wouldn't wake up to a tragedy they'd never understand. And somewhere in the house, my son slept peacefully, dreaming about the future he'd planned. A future that would end in 7 hours with handcuffs and charges and the complete destruction of everything he'd hoped to gain. But first I had to make it to morning. First, I had to survive the night. I didn't sleep. By the time the sky lightened to a pale winter gray, I was already standing at the kitchen window, coffee untouched on the counter, watching the long gravel driveway. At exactly 6:44 a.m., 3 vehicles rolled into view. First came Detective Laura Bennett's unmarked sedan, a dark blue Chevy Malibu with tinted windows. Behind her, 2 Chelan County patrol cars, white with green stripes. Their light bars dark, but their presence unmistakable. They parked in a careful line near the barn engines, idling exhaust pluming in the January cold. My heart hammered. I set down the mug. Bennett stepped out first. She wore a black jacket over her uniform, her badge clipped to her belt, her expression calm and professional. Behind her, 2 officers emerged: Officer Harris, a tall man in his 40s with graying temples, and Officer Cole, younger, broad-shouldered, clipboard in hand. Bennett's eyes found mine through the window. She nodded once. I walked to the front door and opened it before she knocked. "Mr. Hargrove," she said quietly. "We're ready." I nodded. My voice came out steady, though my hands were shaking. "He's upstairs, second door on the left." Grace appeared at the top of the staircase, already dressed. She must have heard the cars. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set. She gave me a small, firm nod and stepped aside as Bennett and Officer Harris climbed the stairs. I stayed in the hallway, my back against the wall, listening. A soft knock. Then Bennett's voice, clear and calm. "Brandon Hargrove, this is Detective Laura Bennett, Washington State Police. Please open the door." A pause. Then a muffled voice, Brandon's, groggy and confused. "What?" The door opened. Brandon Hargrove. Bennett said, "I have a warrant for your arrest. You are being charged with attempted elder abuse, tampering with prescription medication, and conspiracy to commit harm. You have the right to remain silent." "What?" Brandon's voice shot up sharp with panic. "What are you talking about?" I heard footsteps, Brandon stumbling into the hallway. I forced myself to look up. He stood there in a white t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair disheveled, his face twisted in shock and disbelief. His eyes locked onto mine. "Dad," his voice cracked. "Dad, what is this?" I met his gaze. For a moment I saw the little boy who used to ride on my shoulders through the orchard, who laughed when the apples fell into his basket. But that boy was gone. "You know what this is," I said quietly. His face went white. No, Dad, I don't." Bennett stepped forward, Harris at her side. "Mr. Hargrove, we have evidence that you tampered with your father's heart medication, replacing lisinopril with a compound designed to induce cardiac arrest. We also have video footage of you resetting a trap in the barn yesterday morning. You are under arrest." Brandon's mouth opened and closed. "That's insane. That's Dad, you can't believe this." I saw the pills," I said. My voice was steady now, almost cold. "I saw the barn board. I know about Diane Crane." His face drained of all color. For a second he looked like he might collapse. "Turn around, Mr. Hargrove." Harris said, his tone firm but not unkind. Brandon didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on mine, wide and desperate. "Dad, please. I'm your son." "Turn around," Harris repeated. Slowly, Brandon turned. Harris pulled his arms behind his back and snapped the cuffs on. The metallic click echoed in the narrow hallway. That's when I heard the scream. "Brandon!" Vanessa appeared at the end of the hall, wrapped in a robe, her face flushed with sleep and confusion. Her eyes darted from Brandon to the officers, to me. "What's happening, Tom? What's going on?" Bennett stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Mrs. Hargrove, your husband is under arrest. I'm Detective Laura Bennett with the Washington State Police. I need you to stay calm." "Arrest!" Vanessa's voice climbed into a wail. "For what, Tom? Tell me what's happening." Before I could answer, two small figures appeared behind her, Ethan and Lily, both in pajamas, their faces crumpling with fear. "Mommy," Lily whispered, her voice tiny. "Why are they taking Daddy?" Grace moved fast. She stepped past Vanessa and knelt in front of the children, her voice soft and steady. "Hey guys, come with Aunt Grace, okay? Let's go downstairs and have some hot chocolate." Ethan's eyes were wide and wet. "Is Daddy in trouble?" Grace didn't answer. She just took their hands and led them down the stairs, away from the scene, away from the truth they were too young to understand. Vanessa stood frozen, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Tom," she whispered, "please, tell me this is a mistake." I wanted to. God, I wanted to tell her it was all a misunderstanding, that everything would be fine. But I couldn't. "It's not a mistake," I said quietly. She crumpled against the wall, sobbing. Bennett nodded to Harris and Cole. "Let's go." They walked Brandon down the stairs, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking. I followed at a distance, my legs heavy, my chest tight. At the front door, Brandon stopped. He turned to look at me one last time. "Auden," he said, his voice breaking. "Please, I'm your son. Don't let them do this." I looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time in my life, I didn't recognize him. "You stopped being my son the day you put poison in my medicine," I said. His face crumpled. Harris guided him out the door. I watched through the window as they walked him to the patrol car. He stumbled once, and Cole steadied him. They put him in the back seat, his head hanging low, his hands cuffed behind him. The door slammed shut. Grace came to stand beside me. She didn't say anything. She just placed her hand on my shoulder and squeezed. Bennett approached her, expression calm. Mr. Hargrove, I want you to know that Phoenix police arrested Diane Crane 20 minutes ago. She's in custody. You're safe now. I nodded, though I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel anything except a vast, hollow ache. The patrol car pulled away, gravel crunching under its tires. I watched until it disappeared around the bend, until the red taillights faded into the gray January morning. Behind me, I could hear Vanessa crying in the living room. Ethan and Lily's small voices asking Grace questions she couldn't answer. I closed my eyes. It was over. By 9 o'clock, the house had fallen into a strange, hollow quiet. Grace had taken Ethan and Lily upstairs, distracting them with a puzzle. Vanessa sat on the couch, her face pale and swollen hands trembling. I sat across from her in Caroline's old armchair. Detective Laura Bennett sat between us, a thick manila folder on the coffee table. Mrs. Hargrove, Bennett began, her voice calm and steady. I need you to understand what your husband has been accused of and why we arrested him. Vanessa's eyes were red-rimmed, her voice barely a whisper. I don't understand any of this. Bennett opened the folder. Then let me show you. She laid out the first document, a court filing stamped with the Spokane County Clerk's seal. On April 18th last year, your husband filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. His construction company had liabilities totaling $580,000. Vanessa stared at the paper. I knew we had debts. Brandon told me it was temporary. Bennett slid another page across. $280,000 was owed to an illegal casino in Riverside. He'd been gambling there since June. Vanessa's breath hitched. Gambling. Yes. And there's more. Bennett pulled out a photograph, Brandon and a dark-haired woman sitting close together at a casino bar, his arm around her shoulders. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth. Who is that? Her name is Diane Crane, 35 years old, from Phoenix. Criminal record, wire fraud, identity theft. She and your husband have been in contact since June 14th. We've recovered 247 text messages between them. Vanessa shook her head, her voice rising. He was having an affair? Yes, but it wasn't just an affair, Mrs. Hargrove. It was a conspiracy. Bennett laid out another sheet, a transcript of text messages. December 20th. Brandon wrote to Diane, he took the pills. They'll take effect soon. Vanessa's face went white. What pills? Bennett looked at me. I cleared my throat. My heart medication. Brandon tampered with it. He replaced my lisinopril with something else, something that could have ended my life. Vanessa's eyes widened. No, that can't be true. It is, I said quietly. The state toxicology lab confirmed it. The pills were laced with potassium chloride and a diuretic designed to cause a heart attack within a week. She stared at me, mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Bennett continued. We also have video footage of your husband resetting a trap in the barn on December 31st. He tampered with a board in the loft, rigging it so Mr. Hargrove would fall through if he stepped on it. The fall would have been fatal. Vanessa's hands covered her face. A broken sob escaped. No. Grace came down the stairs, moving quietly to sit beside Vanessa. She placed a hand on her shoulder. Vanessa, this isn't your fault. You didn't know. Vanessa shook her head, tears streaming. I knew we were in trouble. I knew he was stressed about money. But I never thought... Her voice cracked. I never thought he could do this. Bennett slid one more document across another text message dated December 22nd. Diane to Brandon. If he lives past New Year, we'll use Plan B. You can't hesitate. Vanessa read it, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. She looked up at me, eyes filled with anguish. Tom, I'm so sorry. I brought him into your life. I married him. I didn't see... Stop. I said, my voice firm but gentle. You couldn't have known. He hid it from all of us. She crumpled forward, shoulders shaking. Grace wrapped an arm around her. Bennett closed the folder. Mrs. Hargrove, your husband is being held without bail. The district attorney is pursuing charges of attempted elder abuse conspiracy to commit harm and tampering with prescription medication. Diane Crane has also been arrested in Phoenix. Vanessa lifted her head, her voice hoarse. What do I do? Bennett's expression softened. You take care of yourself and your children. You're not responsible for his choices. If you want to file for divorce and seek full custody, the state will support you. Vanessa nodded slowly. I'll take the kids and leave today. They don't need to see any more of this. That's a good decision, Bennett said. An hour later, Vanessa was upstairs packing. Grace helped while I stood in the hallway listening to the quiet shuffle of movement. Ethan and Lily came down the stairs, faces confused and tear-streaked. Ethan looked up at me, his voice small. Grandpa, why is Daddy in trouble? I knelt down slowly and looked into his wide, worried eyes. Your dad made some very bad choices. He did things that hurt people, things that weren't right. The police are making sure he can't hurt anyone else. Ethan's lip quivered. Did he hurt you? I hesitated, then nodded. He tried to. But I'm okay now. Lily stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around my neck. I love you, Grandpa, she whispered. My throat tightened. I hugged her back. I love you too, sweetheart. That will never change. Vanessa appeared at the top of the stairs with 2 suitcases. Her eyes met mine, filled with shame, sorrow, and something like gratitude. Thank you. For not blaming me, I stood lifting Lily into my arms. You didn't do this, Vanessa. He did. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Grace carried the bags to the car, while Vanessa herded the children outside. At the door, Ethan turned back one more time. Will we see you again, Grandpa? Anytime you want, I said, my voice breaking just a little. This will always be your home. He nodded, then followed his mother into the cold January morning. I stood in the doorway, watching their car pull away down the same gravel driveway that had swallowed the police cruiser just hours before. Grace came to stand beside me. She didn't say anything. She just took my hand and squeezed. The house felt enormous and empty. But for the first time in months, it also felt safe. The winter sun had already dipped below the Cascade Peaks when Detective Bennett returned. Grace and I sat in the living room, a pot of coffee growing cold on the table between us. The house felt quieter than it had in weeks, emptier too, now that Vanessa and the children were gone. But the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was just there. Bennett knocked softly before stepping inside a thick folder tucked under her arm. She looked tired, her jacket creased, but her eyes were sharp. Mr. Hargrove, Grace, she said, nodding to each of us. I wanted to walk you through the full forensic timeline before I file my final report. You deserve to understand exactly what your son planned and how close it came to succeeding. I swallowed hard and nodded. Grace reached over and squeezed my hand. Bennett sat down, opened the folder, and began. Let's start with July, she said, pulling out a printed map of the farm. Your son visited on the 23rd. According to your account, he spent time in the barn, supposedly checking for repairs. I nodded. He said the boards were loose. They were, Bennett said, but not by accident. We found crowbar marks on the support beam beneath the third board in the loft, 1 inch wide, consistent with a standard pry bar. The nails were lifted approximately 3/4 of an inch, reducing the board's load capacity from roughly 180 pounds to about 40. Grace's breath caught. 40 pounds! Yes. Bennett's voice was calm, clinical. You weigh 180 pounds, Mr. Hargrove. If you'd stepped on that board, it would have collapsed immediately. The fall is 12 feet onto concrete. For a man your age, the survival rate for that kind of impact is less than 30%. I felt the room tilt slightly. I'd walked past that board a dozen times. I'd stood on it checking the rafters the day before Brandon reset the trap. Bennett continued. We believe he tested the trap during his July visit, then waited to see if you'd fall on your own. When you didn't, he moved to Plan B. She pulled out another document, a pharmacy log. On July 24th, the day after he left your farm, a man identifying himself as Tom Hargrove's son entered the Mediquick pharmacy on Wenatchee Avenue. He told the clerk his father needed an early refill because he was traveling. The clerk, following protocol, asked for identification. He showed a driver's license with your name and his photo. A fake ID, huh? Grace set her voice tight. Correct. The man received a bottle of lisinopril, 20 milligrams, or what appeared to be lisinopril. Our lab analysis shows the pills contained 40 milliequivalents of potassium chloride and 25 milligrams of hydrochlorothiazide, a diuretic. No lisinopril at all. I stared at the report, the chemical formulas blurring together. That combination, Bennett explained, causes severe hyperkalemia, dangerously high potassium levels in the blood. Within 7 to 10 days, it triggers arrhythmia, chest pain, confusion, and ultimately cardiac arrest. To a medical examiner, it would look like natural heart failure, especially in a 64-year-old man with a pre-existing prescription for heart medication. Grace's hand tightened around mine. He was going to poison him slowly. Yes. Bennett's tone didn't waver. And if the pills didn't work fast enough, he had the barn trap as a backup. She flipped to another page, text transcripts, highlighted in yellow. On November 10th, Diane Crane sent your son detailed instructions. He needs to trust you. Be warm. Apologize. Make him believe. Your son followed those instructions precisely. He called you on November 14th, the first contact in 4 months. He was affectionate, apologetic, eager to reconnect. He asked to visit for New Year. I closed my eyes. That call had felt so real. I'd let myself hope. Bennett's voice softened just a fraction. You weren't wrong to hope, Mr. Hargrove. He knew how to manipulate that hope. That's what made him dangerous. She laid out the final timeline. December 30th. Your son arrived with his family. He brought the counterfeit pills with him, ensuring you'd take them during his stay. December 31st, he reset the barn trap, making sure the board was loose enough to fail under your weight. His plan was to suggest checking the barn together on January 1st, after you'd been weakened by the medication. You'd step on the board, fall, and he'd call 911 claiming it was a tragic accident. Grace's voice was barely a whisper. And then he'd inherit the farm. Yes. Valued at $3.5 to $4.2 million. Enough to pay off his debts, start over with Diane Crane, and leave his wife and children behind. I couldn't speak. The numbers, the chemicals, the precise cruelty of it all, it was too much. Bennett closed the folder. If we hadn't intervened, Mr. Hargrove, you'd be gone. There's no doubt in my mind. The room fell silent. Finally, I found my voice. How long will he be in prison? Bennett met my eyes. Attempted elder abuse conspiracy to commit harm, tampering with prescription medication, in Washington state, that's 15 to 25 years. Diane Crane, as the primary conspirator, faces 10 to 20. The evidence is overwhelming. They won't walk away from this. I nodded slowly. 25 years. My son would be 64 when he got out, the age I was now. Bennett stood tucking the folder under her arm. I'll be in touch as the trial progresses. If you need anything, call me. Thank you, I said, my voice rough. She nodded and left, her footsteps fading down the gravel drive. Grace and I sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she turned to me, her eyes red-rimmed. Dad, do you regret calling me? Do you wish you'd just let it go? I looked at her, this strong, fierce daughter who had dropped everything to protect me, who had held Vanessa while she wept, who had shielded her niece and nephew from a truth too terrible for children to bear. I never, I said. You saved my life, Grace. Her lip trembled. Mom would be proud of you for fighting back. I thought of Caroline, her laugh, her strength, the way she'd always believed people could change. She'd believed in Brandon, too. Maybe she still would have. But she would have wanted me to live. She'd be proud of you, too, I said quietly. Grace leaned her head against my shoulder, and we sat there together, watching the last light fade from the winter sky. The house was still empty, but it was ours. The morning after Detective Bennett left, Vanessa began packing. Grace and I helped carry suitcases down 2 large ones, backpacks for Ethan and Lily, a box of toys hastily taped shut. Vanessa moved through the house quietly, her face pale, hands never quite steady. Ethan and Lily sat at the kitchen table picking at toast. They were too young to understand what had happened, but they knew something was wrong. Vanessa set the last suitcase by the door. "We're going to Portland. My sister lives there. She has a spare room and the schools are good." I nodded. "That sounds like a good plan. I'm filing for divorce next week and petitioning for full custody. My lawyer says it won't be difficult given the circumstances." "No," I agreed quietly. "It won't be." Grace came down with the last bags. "Car's almost loaded." Ethan walked over slowly, hands in his pockets. Lily followed, clutching a stuffed rabbit. "Grandpa, are we going to see you again?" Ethan asked, his voice small. My throat tightened. "Of course you are. Anytime you want. This is your home, too. This land." I gestured toward the rows of bare apple trees. "This is your heritage. It'll be here when you're ready." Lily's lip trembled. "Is Daddy coming home soon?" Vanessa knelt beside me, placing a hand on Lily's shoulder. "Daddy's going to be away for a long time, sweetheart. He made some very bad choices, and he has to face the consequences. But Grandpa loves you, and Aunt Grace loves you, and I love you. That won't ever change." Lily threw her arms around my neck. "I love you, Grandpa," she whispered. "I love you too, sweetheart." Ethan's eyes were bright and hard. He looked older than 9. "Mom says Daddy tried to hurt you." I met his gaze, steady and honest. "He did. Why? Sometimes people make terrible choices when they're scared or desperate. Your dad was both. But that doesn't excuse what he did." Ethan stepped forward and hugged me, brief and fierce. Vanessa's voice was quiet, but firm. "I'll bring them back to visit when they're ready. I won't let what Brandon did destroy their relationship with you. You're their grandfather. That matters." "Thank you," I said. Grace helped load the car. I stood on the porch with Vanessa watching the children climb into the back seat. "Tom, thank you for not blaming me," Vanessa said. "You didn't do this. He did." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Then she got into the car and pulled slowly down the gravel driveway. Grace and I stood side by side watching the car disappear. "I lost my son," I said quietly. "But I hope I didn't lose my grandchildren." Grace slipped her hand into mine. "You didn't lose them, Dad. They'll come back." The house felt emptier than ever, but it was still ours. 3 months later, spring came to Wenatchee Valley. The apple trees bloomed in waves, first the early galas, then the Honeycrisps, then the Granny Smiths. 10,000 white petals unfurled beneath the Cascade Range, filling the air with sweetness. I walked the rows every morning, checking for frost damage, inspecting the grafts Grace and I had made in February. My knees ached, but I didn't mind. The work felt like living. In March, Brandon had accepted a plea deal. 18 years in state prison for attempted elder abuse conspiracy to commit harm and tampering with prescription medication. Diane Crane received 15 years. "It's over, Mr. Hargrove," Detective Bennett had said. "You're safe." I'd thanked her, but over wasn't quite the right word. The legal battle was done, but the wound was still fresh. Vanessa had finalized her divorce in February, with full custody of Ethan and Lily. True to her word, she brought them to visit once a month. Brief, careful visits where the children ran through the orchard and asked questions about apples and seasons. They didn't ask about their father. I didn't bring him up. Grace came every weekend. Together, we'd replanted damaged sections, repaired the barn, and installed a new security system, cameras at every entrance, motion sensors along the driveway, a panic button beside my bed. I'd also rewritten my will. 60% of the farm would go to Grace with the condition that she maintain the orchard for at least 10 years. The remaining 40% would be held in trust for Ethan and Lily to be released when each turned 25. I joined a support group for elder abuse survivors, too. Once a week, we gathered and shared our stories. We didn't offer easy solutions, but we listened, and sometimes that was enough. One afternoon in mid-April, I stood in the center of the orchard, surrounded by white blooms. The sun was warm on my shoulders. A light breeze carried the scent of apple blossoms and fresh earth. The Cascade peaks still wore crowns of snow glittering against the blue sky. I thought of Caroline. She used to walk these rows with me every spring, her laughter bright as sunlight. She'd believed in second chances, believed people could change. She'd believed in Brandon, too. Maybe she would have forgiven him. Maybe in time I would, too. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean letting him off the hook. You were right, I said aloud. I trusted him too long, but in the end I trusted myself. I knelt and planted a new sapling, a young Honeycrisp, Caroline's favorite. Its roots were small and fragile, but they'd grow. In 10 years, it would bear fruit. In 20, it would stand tall and strong. It would outlive me. It would outlive Brandon's mistakes. That evening, Grace and I sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the Cascades. Apple blossoms drifted on the wind, white as snow. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" Grace asked. I smiled. "I'm thinking your mother and I built something worth protecting. This land will outlive me. It'll outlive Brandon's mistakes. It'll be here for you, for Ethan, for Lily, and for you," Grace said softly. "For as long as you want it." I nodded. "For as long as I want it." 5 lessons I learned. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, don't ignore it. Document everything, dates, times, conversations. Seek help early, don't wait until it's too late. Set boundaries with adult children. Love doesn't mean letting them take advantage. Forgiveness doesn't mean immunity. You can love someone and still keep yourself safe. The apple trees bloomed that spring as they always had, and I was still here to see it. I've had many months to think about everything that happened. When I walk through the orchard now, I realize this wasn't just a family story about land or money. It was a family story about trust, blindness, and the quiet warning signs we sometimes ignore. And if there's one thing I wish someone had told me sooner, it's this: don't wait until the danger becomes undeniable before you protect yourself. For years, I believed loyalty meant endless patience. I told myself that love meant giving chance after chance. But the truth is, love without boundaries can become a trap. My experience may sound like a dramatic dad revenge tale to some people, and maybe in a way it is. But the real lesson isn't revenge. The real lesson is responsibility to protect your life, your dignity, and the people who truly care about you. If you take anything from this family story, let it be this: listen to your instincts. Write things down. Ask questions when something feels wrong. Don't let guilt silence you. A dad revenge narrative may make for gripping storytelling, but real life is about survival and wisdom. I thank God every day that I had the courage and the right people to help me see the truth before it was too late. Today, the orchard still blooms, and I'm still here. And if my experience becomes a family story someone else learns from, then maybe some good came from the pain. Some might call it dad revenge, but to me it was simply choosing life, choosing truth, and refusing to disappear quietly. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this journey. Please share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if you were in the same difficult situation as a father betrayed by his own son? I'd truly value hearing your perspective. If this story moved you in any way, consider subscribing so you won't miss future videos. A gentle note: while inspired by real patterns of family conflict, and elder exploitation, parts of this story, have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. If this type of content isn't your preference, feel free to explore other videos that may suit you better.